countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Summertime in the living ZZ here at the Last Comic Book Shop podcast.
The living ZZ?
I thought it was the LBC. the Long Beach community. I'm not sure what is the LBC.
Welcome back.
Go to the tape.
The Last Comic Shop podcast. We're not going to the tape. This is live. We're doing it live, damn it. In any case, I'm the most Andy Larson. Welcome back to another week of this show that I'm joined oftentimes, well, all the time actually, by Jay Scott and Chad Smith. And it's just us this week sitting around the shop enjoying some summertime reading, as it is Chad's pick this week. And boy, howdy, did we have a lot to read? Because for the first time in a long time, I think we read a series from beginning to end.
You're welcome.
It's true. It's one I've been wanting to read for a while. Which one is it, Chad?
We are reading Tim Seeley and Tony Fleecs' Local Man from Image Comics.
Yes. It was an Eisner Award nominated series, I believe, last year for Best New Series. And speaking of Eisner Awards, I thought that this would be a great opportunity to talk about the Eisners. We like to educate on our favorite award of the comic book season. And it is coming up right around the corner just next month at the San Diego Comic-Con. And one of the awards that's given out every year in terms of the Eisners is the Eisner Hall of Fame. And we've always been here at the Last Comic Shop, somebody that tries to get the word out about these tremendous creators that are being inducted into this lofty academy. And so I thought we'd take the opportunity on the beginning of this week's show to highlight not only some of those folks that are being automatically inducted this year into the Hall of Fame, but also those folks that are nominated.
There's a big list of folks getting in. 21 people are automatically being entered, in addition to those 6 that are going to come from that pool of 18. So there's a lot of people.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It is. Instead of going through the entire list of all those folks, each of us are going to pick one person off of that list that we feel deserves a little bit of extra praise because of what they meant to us in terms of comic books. And we're going to go ahead and start off with J.A. Scott. So, J.A., who do you want to highlight from those folks getting automatically inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Okay, so 12 of them have passed away. 9 are still living. They cover the breadth of comic books. So they are people that might have fallen through the cracks on the first go-round. So the judges are putting them in because they feel like their contributions are worth that much to the industry, but their names might not necessarily be a name that jumps out that you would know. So I'm going to highlight Angelo Torres, who began his career in the early 1950s assisting Al Williamson on EC titles such as Valor, and worked with Frank Franzetta and Roy Krenkel. They were known as the Fleegle Gang.
That's an awesome word.
Yes.
I won't lie. I think I need to get that on a t-shirt, just the Fleegle Gang.
He also contributed to Atlas Mystery and Western titles in the 50s. But then what I really like is that he contributed to Warren titles such as Eerie and Creepy and Blazing Combat between 1964 and 67, and he was a mainstay at Mad, providing caricatures and movie parodies for almost 25 years for Mad magazine.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I didn't know the stuff about Mad, so I'm glad that you educated me on this show. Chad, why don't you go next? Who's your pick off of the inductees?
Well, I was going to say, I've been reading comics, since the 1980s, and a lot of these names were fairly obscure to me. So it's nice to have the opportunity to go in and learn. Like, I recognize Steve Bissett, but there are a ton of people in here whose names I may have just seen and glossed over, and I hadn't really appreciated a lot of their contributions. And one of those is somebody who I remember reading about in Sean Howe's Marvel Comics book, where he sort of told the background between the start of Marvel and Timely, and then into Alice Comics in the 50s when everything had dried up. And I remember Joe Meneely was a guy who he was drawing Black Knight, and he was like Stan Lee's number one guy. And unfortunately, one night coming home, stepped onto the train tracks and ended up not being Stan Lee's number one guy. But, prior to that, he had created Jimmy Woo and Yellow Claw. He had done a ton of Western work. It's one of the great what ifs. What if Joe Meneely, had survived? How different the modern Marvel age would have been. Would he have been in addition to Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and laying down the framework? Would he have been instead of Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko with Stan Lee? What could have happened? That's one of those great unanswered mysteries there. So it's neat to see him recognized.
No, and I'm glad that you brought him up, because I had an opportunity finally this past year to read some of those Black Knight comic books. There's not many of them. I think it only ran for like 6 issues or something like that. And it's a really good comic book. You can see a lot of the threads that Stan Lee would eventually pull on to put in from the Marvel age in that Black Knight series. And the art is tremendous. And so if you have an opportunity to check out that Black Knight book, I think it's in a Marvel's Masterworks. You can pick it up, and it's worth a read. Pretty great stuff from the early Silver Age out of Marvel. My pick from this list is, I guess, for folks that may be longtime listeners of the Last Comic Shop, it's a guy that did a book that we reviewed, and I believe I gave this book a pretty high grade compared to my co-hosts when we reviewed it. That would be The Six Voyages of Lone Sloan, and the artist that I'm talking about is Philippe Drouant. Or Drouet. I think we all had pronunciations, and I hope someday I'll meet him so I can say, how do you pronounce your name? But he was one of the most influential French comic book artists of all time. And I still go on record as saying that if folks like Jim Starlin and some other folks at Marvel during the 1970s hadn't seen his work on, say, Lone Sloan, and just been inspired by it with some of their cosmic drawings, I will eat my hat, because I feel like there's a direct line from the stuff that he was doing in his sci-fi comics to eventually what made its way into mainstream Marvel and DC. And so not only did he do these awesome works, such as Lone Sloan, but he went on to be one of the co-founders of Metal Hurlant, which eventually became better known as, for us here in America, as Heavy Metal. So Heavy Metal is a tremendous magazine. It's been going on for years and years and years with just wonderful anthology stories about horror and sci-fi and just great stuff. And so many more people have worked for Heavy Metal over the years that I think giving, credit where credit's due, that Philippe helped to create such a lasting institution such as Heavy Metal for comic book fans is tip of the cap to you, sir.
There you go. I remember Lone Sloan. That was good and weird. Definitely weird.
Weird, yes.
Remember the castle in space? Like, it was just like what do you call it? Ramparts?
Yes, and that's where Jack Kirby got the source wall from.
Yes. See, I told you. I'm not saying people cribbed. I'm just saying if they didn't see some of that art and were influenced and being like, wow, that's really crazy stuff. Again, I think I'm right on that. In any case, let's move on to our picks from the pool of nominees. Again, these are folks that are not automatically being inducted into the hall, but they will be announced at the San Diego Comic-Con. So I thought in honor of these nominees, because it's always wonderful to be nominated, Chad, why don't you give us the entire list of everybody that's being nominated this year?
Okay, there are 18 nominees, including Alfredo Alcala, Kyle Baker, Bob Balling, Eddie Campbell, Roz Chast, Dan Klaus, Mark Evanier, Mike Friedrich, Don Heck, Junji Ito, Ben Catcher, Todd Klein, Peter Cooper, Lee Mars, John Romita Jr., Posey Simmons, Leonard Starr, and Rich Veit. Did I get Veit right? I never know how to say that guy's name.
Yeah, I would say Veit. Yeah, I think it's fine. Why don't we start off with JA? Out of that list, and there's a lot of good names on that if you were a judge, you would vote for.
Alfredo Alcala is always going to get my vote. All of his work on Savage Sword of Conan and, being a Filipino.
Yes. Not only because of the Conan work, but primarily because he was the guy that drew the original 4 mini comics of Masters of the Universe. That's where I know his work from. If you hadn't gotten Alfredo Alcala drawing He-Man and Skeletor and Tila and Man-at-Arms, you wouldn't have those iconic looks for those characters. And some of those stories are still some of the best Masters of the Universe has to offer. If you ever have an opportunity to pick up the big omnibus that was released by Dark Horse Comics with all the mini comics, I would highly recommend it.
And then I guess going back to, Mad Magazine, Peter Cooper did Spy versus Spy for every issue from 1997 through 2022. And
those are so fun. So crazy pants.
And he also won an Eisner Award back in 2016 for Ruins. And anyone who adapts Kafka's work into comics probably deserves something.
That's right. That shows a lot of range to go from Spy versus Spy to then doing Metamorphosis. And also Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. He also did a adaptation of that too.
Yeah.
So I think those are some good picks. Chad, I'm sure there's going to be a couple folks on your list that are the same, but let's hear yours.
Yeah, we'll get the overlap out of the way right out of the gate. With John Romita Jr., he's my number one on this list. I am a big John Romita Jr. fan, whether it dates back to the early portions of his style where he was leaning closer to his dad when he was doing his first run on Amazing Spider-Man, that whole Hobgoblin era. And then he comes back years later and does a second and third generation runs on Amazing Spider-Man. And he's just been the consummate Spider-Man artist. And he's someone, he still has his feet planted back when comics were fun and exciting and action-packed. And I know there are tons of people out there that will take umbrage with his style and how blocky it is. But there's just something about the way he tells a story.
So disappointed to this day we never got a full-on John Romita Jr. Silver Surfer book. How awesome would that have been? All of his sketchiness.
We've talked about his Daredevil run, some of my favorite comic books of all time, when he was teamed up with Al Williamson. And you always know when you see John Romita Jr.'s name on a comic book, you're going to get a good story in there.
That Eternals run that we read
beautiful
with him was so great.
I bought an Eternals poster book, not because I care anything for the Eternals, but because I knew I was going to get some really awesome John Romita Jr. and also Jack Kirby pictures in there. But anywho, so he's my number one out of that list. Alfredo Alcala, another one that Jay mentioned. Third on my list, I'm going to go Todd Klein, a letterer. And he was one of the first letterers with John Workman that I noticed when they would do a book, right? And his name was synonymous with quality lettering for years and years and years in comics. That's one of those underappreciated skill sets that I'm glad to see that he's getting some recognition. So fourth on my list, I'm going to go with Mark Evanier. I might be butchering his name and I feel bad. But this guy, his own work is impressive, including, I didn't realize he worked with Sergio Aragonés on Gru the Wanderer for 40 years, which is crazy. But I also know his name a lot for helping to spread the Jack Kirby mythos. He was an assistant for Jack Kirby, and he has contributed in almost every way you could see fit to promote the Jack Kirby name and what Jack Kirby was able to accomplish. And he's just been a great advocate and historian and educator when it comes to comic books and the history of comic books. And so his name is one I see a lot, as I'm learning more about the industry. And so I have great admiration for the knowledge and the experiences that this guy's had, the things that he's been able to share. So much would be lost to the sands of time without people like Mark Evanier. So kudos to him.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start off my list with a name we haven't brought up yet, and that's Leonard Starr. I'm putting Leonard Starr in the Hall of Fame just because he's not only one of those workman artists that never gets enough credit. Again, he started way back in the early days of the golden age of comic books doing, Human Torch and Submariner at Marvel. He moved over to Fawcett Comics. He was there for a while. He did a lot of strips. That's primarily where I know his work from. Some of his stuff on Flash Gordon, unfortunately, went uncredited because basically he was like a ghost artist at the time. And so it wasn't until later years that we found out what the wonderful work he was doing on the Flash Gordon's comic strip in the 1950s. I recall first seeing his name on two books in my early youth. One was he was working on Morbius, the Living Vampire. He also was the guy that revived the Little Orphan Annie comic strip in 1979. And that was, again, something that was going on right after the big musical movie that I recall seeing as a kid. And so I remember not only seeing it in the theaters, but then going and reading the Little Orphan Annie comic strip that was being drawn by Leonard Starr at the time. The last thing I want to say, though, about Leonard Starr, for those folks that may want an interesting fact outside of comics, he was the guy that wrote what is called the series Bible for the original Thundercats cartoon series. Not only did he do that, but he wrote like 25 episodes of the original Thundercats cartoon series. So if you are a huge fan of the 1980s cartoon series of the Thundercats, as well as Silverhawks, he did work for Silverhawks as well. But if you like either of those shows, you owe a lot to Leonard Starr and the work that he did. My second one on the list is going to be Mike Friedrich. Again, I think I've voted for him in years past. This isn't the first go around for Mike Friedrich, and I feel like he's one of those guys that kind of just deserves to get in finally. See, I keep on seeing his name on these like lists of inductees, but again, as the guy that developed Star Reach, brought together all of that creative talent, an independent press book in the 70s where people could come and tell their stories and have an alternative to working for DC or Marvel.
No, yeah, that's just because he did so much work on like Captain Marvel and Warlock, which I do like those cosmic type stories.
And then last will be just John Romita Jr. We just did that Daredevil run, which is like started to creep up in my all-time favorite runs ever. And so, he just deserves to be in with his dad.
I've been telling you for years on that Daredevil run, you've been sleeping.
Well, hopefully other people won't be slipping now that we've got that episode out for all of our fans. And stick around. We'll give you some more updates after San Diego Comic-Con here on The Last Comic Shop. But it is time to get to our comic book review for this week, and that is Local Man, all of the issues, the entire run, right after this.
Hey fellas, looking to save money on your collectible supplies? Whether it's comics, cards, sports memorabilia, or miscellaneous pop culture goodies, make sure to use promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off your orders at bcwsupplies.com. Not only does it get you a discount on BCW's already low prices, but using LCS Pod at checkout is an amazing way to show support to the Last Comic Shop podcast, the most incredible comic book podcast on the airwaves. So if you are in need of collectible supplies, head out to bcwsupplies.com and use promo code LCSPOD today. That's promo code LCSPOD.
You know what I think? This world we're in right now is the fairy tale. And what's really real is on the other side.
Ramsey, mechanic by day, aspiring comic book creator by night, went into the woods and tripped. He was bombarded by bizarre and mysterious glyphs that he drew into his sketch pad and onto the body of his muse, Regina.
Oh, groovy! Your art is crawling all over me.
Shit. What is going on with you?
What's going on with you? All of a sudden, you're a complete drip, baby. Maybe you need another limb to the head. Ah!
Bloom, written and created by Ted Sikora, with art by Butch Mappa.
How are you feeling, Ram Man?
You've never experienced a story so astonishing, so far out and away from the beaten path.
Where in the am I?
Blast off with Bloom, the origin of a prophet. Order yours at herotomorrow.com.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for our Read Pile Review. Yes, that time of every single show where we read a comic book during the week, or actually a lot of comic books, because Chad was like, let's do the whole series. And I was dumb enough to say, that's a great idea. Let's do it. But in his defense, I don't think we ever do this. Traditionally, a lot of times on these shows, we'll get these runs, and we'll do volume 1 or volume 2, and we'll be like, oh, I wonder if what would happen if you just kept on reading, right? And I never do. I just read the volume 1 and volume 2, and then I'm on to the next book. So it was nice to sit down, and it didn't hurt that this actually had a beginning and an end. This is a series that's over now. And so Local Man, I think it's 14 issues and a 25?
14 issues and 2 specials.
One called Bad Girls?
Oh, yeah.
And then you have to explain the whole 25, but we'll get to that in just a second. J.A., why don't you give us again who worked on this particular series?
Okay, so Local Man was created, written, and drawn by Tim Seeley and Tony Fleecs. They wrote the whole thing, but the book was it had this split personality because there was a modern story being told, which was drawn by Tony Fleecs, and then there was a 90s, when Image was first getting started, story, and that was drawn in a very 90s style by Tim Seeley. We had colors by Brad Simpson and Philippe Sobrero, and then covers by Tim Seeley and Tony Fleecs, Todd Nauk, Brett Booth, Bill Mouse, Joe Benitez, and Brian Reber. And again, we read the trades, which combined all the issues plus a couple of one-shot stories that were meant to bring people into the tent halfway through, so you didn't feel like you needed to go back and read the issues if you didn't want to.
Ian's read the trades.
Well,
you guys,
some of us read the trades, as Chad fans out all of the single issues.
Chad was a Wednesday warrior with this series. He was buying these issues
What do you mean was?
Well, it's not out anymore.
I mean, he still is a Wednesday warrior.
He is still a Wednesday warrior,
yes.
But what I'm saying was he was going to war, finding those issues on a Wednesday basis. And before we get into that 10-cent synopsis, Chad, was it just the 90s covers that pulled you in originally? What did it? What made you... I got to get this.
So I can't remember if this was my first exposure to Tony Fleecs, or we had met him at a convention.
We did.
Talked to him about Stray Dogs, and I read that. And if you haven't read Stray Dogs, that's fantastic and scary. And
did he do a My Little Pony too?
Yes, he and Trish Forster, partner on Stray Dogs, they had worked on My Little Pony and done all sorts of licensed things. But no, issue number 1 comes right out of the gates, and it's a flip book. The first side of the book has the Tony Fleecs cover that's a pretty standard modern book you'd see right down to the font. But whenever you flip it over on the other side, you get the Tim Seeley version, and it is straight 90s cheese. All the things I loved about 90s Image books are in this front cover, and I'm like, yeah, I got that.
At the comic book shop, what cover were they showing?
I'm going to guess it was the 90s one, because that's the one that I love. But issue 1, it ends with an homage to Spawn number 4, where they string up the Ice Cream Man.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of homages.
Oh, so many homages. But yeah, that just hooked. But from there, and I'll just go into the 10-cent synopsis. The premise of this book is it's really fun. If you were an Image kid in the 90s, you will learn to appreciate this. If you were a Valiant kid, we're going to find out. Because Jay was our resident Valiant guy. And I don't know, Andy, you were a Valiant guy. You read lots of Jay's stuff. But were you on the Image train?
I was all over the place. I read a little Image, a little Valiant, little Now Comics, little Dark Horse. I was all over.
There you go. So the basic premise is you have a hero named Crossjack.
Crossjack.
That's the new Shut Up Light Ray. But Crossjack has shamed his town. But in the 90s, he was part of a team called Third Gen, right?
Third Gen.
Bad with all
Because there was a second gen and a first gen. Maybe a first gen. I don't know. There was definitely a second gen and a third gen and a fourth gen.
Yeah. So anyway, but he was part of this team, and he has like a shaft-like ability to hit his mark. You know, he's the Hawkeye sort of guy, and he's good with a shield. He screws it up and gets kicked out of the team. And so in the modern day, he is now a pariah. Everybody hates him. And he goes back to his hometown to move in with his parents, and his parents are disappointed with him. He runs into his ex-girlfriend, who's now married to the police chief, and she runs a bakery. And he's just trying to put his life back together. The Third Gen are very litigious in nature. And so he's not allowed to use his old name, Crossjack. He's not allowed to use anything resembling a shield. And so all of his heroics, he just has to put on a mask, and it's Seal the Onion bit. You know, local man does this, and local man saves priest, and local man, but he's just local man now. And then the rest of the series is just a love letter to those 90s Image comics. It is a flip book. So the modern version is Midwestern noir. And then you do the flip side, and it's all these adventures from the 90s in the style and in the 90s, and it's just bonkers crazy.
Now, my initial thought of this is I went into this book very, very excited. I like this assignment because I get to read something from the beginning to the end. And anybody that used to listen to our old show, Chad and I did this once with
Planetary.
Planetary. I was going to say Transmetropolitan. It's always interesting. You get to read something from beginning to end, and you kind of have to put yourself in the mindset that there's going to be probably story arcs, and there are, because there's 3 volumes here. But the overarching story is what Chad said. This is a dickwad that comes back to his hometown and has decided to make good on the fact that he was a jerk previously and try to make amends. Although he continues to do at times really jerky things. Like, for example, he immediately comes back to town and there's his ex-girlfriend who's married with kids, and he's just like, meh, whatever. Let's just start boning. It's fine. At no point is he a really good guy, but he's trying to make amends. He's on the 12-step program. And so you get to really see some character growth as we can then go through all these these different mysteries that are in this town, which I won't lie was probably less of the interesting things for me. I honestly like the story of a guy that was trying to make good on past mistakes. I like a good redemption story. So I was digging that. It took me a while with the Camo Crusader, 3rd Gen, and then this 4th Gen, and the stealing of powers, as you'll eventually find out. I won't lie, I had to go back and reread some of these issues a couple times because it's almost like I felt like I was missing something.
Were you not reading the backups?
I was reading them, and the only backup that I read that I totally understood was the one where Camo Crusader basically lets Crossjack screw his wife. Because he's impotent, which was crazy good. The whole idea that somebody would be so invulnerable that they wouldn't feel pain, yet they wouldn't actually feel pleasure either, was that's genius. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Yeah, go to it, Crossjack, in this tent with Neon, who doesn't care, the whole non-monogamy thing. J.A., I mean, what did you think?
When I was reading this, and obviously the throwback issues were very Image, and I loved all the homages and even the artistic choices. There was that issue where they were bringing all this team together, and each of the team members looked like they were drawn by a different original member of the Image pen of artists. I really love that. But then the modern story was, to me, it was closer to what Valiant was back in the 90s. So it was like getting kind of a best of both worlds, because I think current day Image is very similar to what Valiant was back in that day. Less bombastic, more people walking around in jeans and t-shirts and doing their superheroing.
It's baked in there, man, in the Gold issue where they crossed over with the Valiant universe.
Yes.
It changes him, dude. It changes him.
I enjoyed it. I do think I agree with you that some of the story arcs were less impactful than others. The first 5, 6, 7 issues I thought was like, bam, straight out of the gate, incredible. And then as we got into sort of trying to wrap up the story and what's going to happen, and then it was like, and maybe this is a feature, not a bug, but it was like Smallville. It's like, why is everything happening in this one little town? I guess that's sort of like why in the whole universe does everything happen to the Skywalkers?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm glad you brought it up. But again, Chad, you were the huge fan. Are we completely wrong with all of what we're saying?
I do worry that you guys are missing some of the stuff. Like in Modern Image, they have a lot of these books now that are, crime noir set in the Midwest, right? It's telling that Modern Image style story of, this is this postmodern guy who screwed things up and everyone in his town hates him. And, he calls his Uber driver and the guy shows up. He's like, "You cross-jack?" And then just drives away. That guy. Yeah, but they supplement each of the steps in this crime noir, like he's trying to figure things out, like who's the bad guy. But they supplement it with these 90s passages where like, Shadowhawk's on the cover, or it's issue 3. The supplement is part 11 of a 16-part mega event where the heavens are crashing down and the devil's trying to take over the world. And that's where Crossjack and Neon have their first kiss because the world is ending anyway. But like, dude, if you were there in the 90s reading the Extreme books when they did their 20-part crossovers, Extreme Destroyer and all that other stuff, like that's what that was. Even this modern story is pulling from elements from classic Image. Like the first Wildcats miniseries, Dan Quayle gets replaced by the Damonites. In this book, Dan Quayle is still a bad guy. There's still a Dan Quayle in this book. You get the Gold issue, which is the crossover issue. Instead of being Image and Valiant this time around, it's about how Crossjack is combined with this other Valiant-esque character. And Neon is also, but they learn different things about each other and about themselves. And like, he learns he might be a little bit of a dick. But then part of the crossover, they're going up against all of these public domain characters, and they bring in Stryker from Top Cow and Boof. Do you guys remember Boof? I never read a Boof book in my life, but I knew Boof happened. And like Street Angel, that's a more modern one, and the character from Love Everlasting, the Tom King book, is in there. And at one point, when the bad guy's going up against Stryker from Cyberforce, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so scared. He's got 4 arms." And then Stryker goes, "No, I got 5," and tears off his other arm. Beats him with his own arm, Chewbacca style. And then you get to issue 6. And issue 6, the version I have, has the Bloodstrike Rub the Blood cover homage. You get the newscasters from the old Spawn comics. You get the full-page spread that looks like Savage Dragon waking up in the Field of Fire. You get references. Shaft's girlfriend pulls the Strife reveal for the big thing. And it's like, "Can't you believe it was who I was the whole time?" You're like, "What are you talking about?" And then I'm like, "Wait a minute, is that the girl from Youngblood 1? And I had to go back and look. Yeah, that's the girl from Youngblood 1 because she's talking about Shaft and just disappeared. And then you get the Spawn 10 with all the arms sticking out of the jail. Remember we talked about that when we did Spawn the other, and all the arms out of it. And then you have the issue where he's on drugs. He goes to the hippie commune, and they dope him up on drugs, and he's wandering around. And his girlfriend sends him a picture of a donut, but he thinks it's her butthole. And so he sends her a picture of his junk, and it's hilarious.
That was good. That was good. Okay, so I get it.
I'm thinking that you like this book, Chad.
If you were a huge fan of Image in the 90s and read so much of the Image in the 90s, your mileage is going to be a lot more than somebody me or JA that like...
I was surprised they didn't do the thing like Image X Month where they crossed over. But before we got on, you guys were like, "Why does he have a cybernetic arm?" Dude, you guys forgot all about the Images of Tomorrow, where all the Images books shifted to issue 25. They were on like issue 11, and then the next month they shipped issue 25. So that's what this book does. They're on issue 13, and then they go to issue 25 for the Images of Tomorrow.
Why did they do that? Is it just because they couldn't ship in time, or I never got that?
It was the big fun Image gimmick. They were like, "This is where these books are going to be."
Oh, we're going to do issue 25. Did they release corresponding issues between whatever issue, like 13 or 12 or where they were, to 25? Did any of the books, obviously Spawn made it to issue 25. How many books didn't? Youngblood, how many books are there in Youngblood?
Yeah, Youngblood, if you count the Team Youngbloods, and we'll talk about this later on, we're getting close to 100. I don't know if Shadowhawk did the Images of Tomorrow thing.
Cyberforce,
I'm pretty sure, did one. Supreme did one. It was a lot of the Extreme books. Yeah, there were a lot of books that didn't make it to issue 25, but that didn't stop him from putting it out. And so that was actually one of the weirdest parts about this, because I had read the first 10 or so, and there was a break, and so I was just stacking up issues. And so after I went to issue 25, there was no more after that. And I kept looking like, wait a minute, where's the next? Did I miss it? And it took me a long time, until I went back and read it. I was like, oh, that was it. They went to 25 and just stopped.
which, as you said, that's very Image to go from 13 to 25 and then nothing more, because
because yes, way to get that cyber fist in a velvet glove, Jay. That's so Image, meaning like it's kind of half-assed.
Yes.
That's a feature, not a bug.
At what point does homage just become crap?
Exactly. Just, I don't want to do more work. I just copying
it. It is circle back around, buddy. It is circle back around. Now it's art.
Yeah.
Touched all the notes. I'm telling you, if you loved 90s Image, you have to read Local Man. It is so much fun. It is so good. And like, there's so many little gags and things throughout to keep you entertained, but it's not just, oh, here's a series of homages. It tells a satisfying story along the way. You get the twists and the turns, and sure, there are some things that are a little confusing, like I wasn't sure about the dog, and I'm still not entirely sure about the dog, and when the dog became this thing.
Dude, the dog is the best part.
That is,
he's like the
best.
third best dog in comic books after Pizza Dog, and I don't know, your mileage may vary if you like Super Dog,
Lying
Crypto,
Cat.
Lying Cat, yes, Lying Cat.
That's not a dog.
No.
Garfield, no, that's not a dog. Odie.
Odie.
I don't know.
All right, we're not going down this rabbit hole.
But anyway, so the dog was 14 when he left. When he comes back, the dog is still alive, and it turns out the dog has some stuff going on there. So that took me a little bit to wrap my brain around. They play with all the tropes. They have fun with the tropes. And while they're having fun, they also manage to tell, a story with twists and turns. And, oh, this guy's a bad guy, but he's not that bad of a guy. But no, he's a bad guy. And this guy that you think is a bad guy, is he that bad of a guy? He's kind of grown since then. There's a lot of really great elements to this. And the fact that it's only 3 trades, I read this today, like all in one go. And, just sat down from start to finish and had a great time with it. It's easy to digest, and I hope that they'll come out with more of it, just because, like I said, I had such a good time. Such a good time with this book.
All right. Well, you heard Chad's glowing praise for Local Man, but will that equate into a solid rating? We'll be right back with our final thoughts on Local Man right after this.
In a world where there's often 60 plus years of history to worry about, how can you quickly get into a new comic character or franchise? If you're like me, then you turn to video games. But how well does that work out? In some cases, pretty well. In others, it's a giant disaster. But how can you know which games will set you on the right path, and which games will just leave you more confused than you were before? Play Comics is the show for you. I'm Chris, and each episode we take a look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to that source material. So listen in and get the scoop on which games are worth your time over at playcomics.com or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
I'm Chris Jakimick. I served in the United States Air Force and I deployed 3 times. Being a veteran, it's interwoven into your DNA, is really the absence of the connection and the purpose that can really drive a lot of veterans to some negative thoughts. For those who are in a suicidal crisis, the window of time to save somebody's life is very short. Our duty is to protect ourselves and protect our families, and one way you can do that is store your weapons safely. Store all your guns securely. Help stop suicide.
Brought to you by End Family Fire and the Ad Council.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for ratings, where we hope that you don't have a crossjack in your town, although it would be pretty fun. It would be pretty fun to go to somebody's funeral, right? And then just say, we're very sorry for your loss. You, crossjack.
Yeah, they go to the mom, we're sorry. His dad's passed away. You, crossjack. We're sorry. Crossjack.
And then the guy that comes all the way around that drives the Black Beauty, the pickup truck. I'm just saying that because I want to fit in. I think you're a pretty cool guy now.
Yeah, you're all right, but don't let them know that I know that. And then there's the scene where he's like, crossjack's like, oh, if only we had weapons to get in here. And he's like, dude, this is Wisconsin. And he goes back and opens up the back of his truck and just all this guns and ammunition and AKs and everything else there.
Here's the guy that can't miss anything with a bunch of guns. All right. Well, what was our rating scale this week, J.A.?
Appropriately, 1 out of 4. You, crossjacks.
We're going to go ahead and start off with J.A. We're going to leave Chad for last because I feel like Chad gave his rating with the 15-minute diatribe he had in the previous segment. So, J.A., again, what did you think?
Yeah, I really loved that first volume. The second volume started to waver a bit, and by the third volume, I thought that they had extended this sort of play out a bit too much. They ran out of story. The homages got a bit tedious. The whole concept was less impactful than it had been in the first 2 volumes. The story also wasn't as interesting when they got into this whole, we're stealing powers from old people to give to young people so that they can resell it on the consumer market to the highest bidder. It didn't seem as fun anymore. I thought the plot was a bit convoluted at that point. I loved the art. The modern Local Man was a bit like Hawkeye. I mean, it was a bit like Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, I thought. Maybe they were drawing from that a bit for inspiration. And then the 90s stuff was just... everything was big in the 90s, including pecs and costumes and ridiculous headgear that serves no purpose. Crossjack's wrestling helmet, headgear, no reason for that at all. I loved all of it. I don't know, 3.5, I guess. 3.5, you, Crossjacks.
Oh,
because I really enjoyed it, and I did like the back and forth, sort of the 90s, and then as a whole, for this team to put that together, I thought. And that's where that extra 0.5 comes, is just sort of the package that it was, and weaving a modern tale within sort of this homage to 90s image books.
At one point, there is that picture of As a Whole, which was real funny.
Terrible.
The image books and the diminishing returns. Like, once again, that's a feature, not a bug. That's how things went.
That's not a feature. That is a bug. Okay, sorry.
No!
Sometimes you got to call a bug a bug. I did like that we finally saw somebody go to 0 on the spawnometer and die, because Spawn's been waiting to go to 0 for how many years now?
I'm going to go next, and I want to preface my particular rating by saying that what I loved about Local Man was there wasn't a single issue in which I didn't find something to smile about or feel joy about. There wasn't a single issue that went by that I didn't find either a funny or poignant or just, I don't know. These guys are professionals. Tim Seeley, I love your work. Tony Fleecs, I love your work. You guys write and create awesome comic books. And every single issue I feel like is worth your money because you're going to get a little bit of that of something. But I feel like this would have been a series which I would have rated a lot higher had I only read the first volume, or maybe the first volume and maybe the second one. I actually My favorite issue of all of the issues was the one where they give him the mushroom peyote stuff. He becomes the kid that can't miss, and his little spiritual mythical quest to find himself, and then he finds out that his ex-girlfriend is actually the real bad guy, which I just thought was a tremendously great issue from beginning to end. I thought that was great, but it's sandwiched in this storyline that eventually ends with like the town of Farmington being, drowned in a flood, and then him just like running away, and then checking up with Neon for a little bit, and then it just at that point I feel like something went off the rails somewhere, and so Volume 3 is gonna bring this rating down because I don't think Volume 3 was a satisfying ending. I don't think they nailed the ending at all. I feel like something else should have happened, because what happened, the Dan Quill thing, that was, but I don't know. There just something was off about that third volume. So kudos again to this creative team for putting together something. But at the end of the day, there's too many times I had to go back and reread things. Too many times I felt like I was walking into a conversation with Chad and Tony Fleecs and Tim Seeley, and they were all laughing about Image, and I was like, I read Spawn #1, Shrugs, like I don't get it, guys. Like I don't get it. But it is still a good series, really well drawn, really well crafted, really well designed. And there's a good thing in every issue, so it's like a 3. You Crossjacks. It's a really good series. You should read it, but I was hoping for a 4. I really won't lie. I was really hoping this was going to knock it out of the park, and I think I would have given it a 4 had I only read the first volume. But I read the whole thing, and I was like, didn't nail the ending, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, I disagree humbly. I'm going to give it 4. You Crossjacks. I've gushed enough about this, and I do think one of the fun hallmarks about this, and I like how you mentioned every issue there was something fun, something that brought you joy, something, whether it were the homages, whether it were the surprising callbacks, whether it was little background things or just out-and-out jokes. This book is jam-packed, and you can tell it's a labor of love for those comics. They're not making fun of those comics. They're celebrating those comics from the 90s and using that to fuel some modern work today, which on its own, do I think the Noir story would have been as compelling without the flashback things? I don't think so. I think everything worked in a grand cohesion. And it was really impressive to me how they were able to weave both stories. And each side, they left some crumbs, right? They left some things where it's like, man, I wish they would have gone more in depth with this. Or I could have read 2 or 3 more issues, from the Valiant crossover where he's with that other guy, or when he meets up with his future self. It's like, man, you're a dick. The guy has to go and hit on the girl, and he's using these cheesy pickup lines. He says, what? But old me got in my head. I love that stuff. And there were those fun little meta notes. And we talked about the issue where he's all drugged out, and he's walking through the page breaks again. He's walking through the letter pages and just talking to himself and stealing the word balloons. There was just a lot of fun creativity here that you don't see out of every book. In a time right now with comics where I feel like so many books are the same. They're all trying to do Brian Bendis with the same art style. This was something different. This was something fun. This was something new and something old. It borrowed a heck of a lot, but it made something that was a worthwhile creative endeavor. And so that's why I think, 4. You Crossjack. See how fun that is?
It is fun to say. I won't lie. So in any case, it's now time for recommendations. It's that time of every single show where we hope that you go out to your local comic book shop and pick up Local Man, either in single issues, if you can find them, or in these awesome 3 trade paperbacks that collect the entire series, as well as any other Image stuff. I'm sure that might be some of Chad's recommendations. Who knows, though? We're going to start off with J.A. Scott because we've got a little bit of a pattern here, and he's been kicking it off nicely. So, J.A., what do you got?
I am recommending some Image. This is a trade paperback and also the complete run of every single Cyberforce issue. So that tells you how many Cyberforce issues there were, since it's not an omnibus. But the complete Cyberforce Volume 1 trade paperback came out in 2022. This reprints Cyberforce Zero, Cyberforce Tin Men of War 1 through 4, Wildcats Killer Instinct 5 through 7, Cyberforce Volume 2 1 through 13, Cyberforce Origins Cyblade number 1, Cyberforce Origins Striker number 2, and Cyberforce Annual number 1. So I was always a massive fan of Mark Silvestri's art and run on the X-Men back in the 90s. So this is just that, but with not Chris Claremont. So, it's great art.
Well, my recommendation, I think, is going to go on more of the writing tip. And it was one of the books that I read in the 90s that came out of Image that I actually got all of the issues for. I think it's the only Image comic that I got all of the issues for, and it's kind of cheating because there was only 6 of them, and that would be 1963. That's right, by the legendary Alan Moore. And who did the art on that?
I feel like you might have a Rich Veidt or a Steve Bissett on art for one of the issues at least.
Yeah, it was a wide variety of folks that did art on those. I think, didn't Don Simpson do an issue? John Tolbin, Dave Gibbons worked on some, Jim Valentino worked on some. It was just a lot of different creators. And it was set up with the big conceit that this was like what was going on in Marvel in the 1960s. The start of the Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man. And so they were basically creating analogs to those particular characters within the Image and being able to tell kind of stories. And I always thought it was kind of neat because none of them were like origin stories, right? They were all like stories that happened well into the run of these characters. And I remember picking up the first issue of Mystery Incorporated, which was kind of like their Fantastic Four with the Planet, Neon Gas Girl, kind of like Neon. Yeah. Is that?
Oh,
I don't know. But there was a Crystal Dude and some other person that was, I don't know, sure. Then it followed up with the Fury, and then you had the Tales to Uncanny, which was basically your Tales of Suspense with your Captain America, which was Ultimate Special Agent, as he foiled the assassination attempt against President Kennedy. And then you had Hypernaut, which I always thought was one of the coolest characters ever. And then you had N-Man and Johnny Beyond and Horus, Lord of Light. And then it all kind of congregated into their version of the Avengers, which was called the Tomorrow Syndicate, which I always thought was the awesomest name for any superhero group ever. But I was in love with these 6 issues, and you can find them in buck bins nowadays. And I really recommend that you pick them up because Alan Moore doesn't always have to write stuff that's like, I'm not going to say next level, but like just stuff you have to think about a lot. This is stuff where you don't have to think about it. You can just enjoy it as good comic booking, kind of an homage, kind of a parody, but never making fun of the Marvel of the 1960s, kind of like what Local Man did with Image of the 90s. Like, I think there's some parallels you could do with the 1963 book and Local Man.
There were some shots in there at Marvel and DC, but my favorite part about those books were the ads.
Oh, yeah.
The ads. Shamed by You English? Like, oh, I love it. Love it.
And the Joseph Stalin as Frankenstein, you can get your 6 foot commie monster. And I was just like, shoot. Where was that supposed to go, though? Shaft was supposed to be, wasn't Shaft the character?
Yeah, all the Image characters are supposed to, like, they were going to go into the modern day, and that's the part that never happened. That's when Rob Liefeld left to go do Awesome Comics, and that's why his girlfriend was so mad, because they kicked him out of Image, and all of a sudden all the Shaft stuff didn't exist anymore, and it caused the multiversal rift that they're talking about in Local Man. Dude.
Well, what's your recommendation this week, Image Man?
Okay, Image Comics is a big deal for me, because as it was happening, that was a super exciting time for me as a comic reader. Just the buzz that it generated and the lasting legacy, I think, is something that's so unique and creative and so vital to keeping comics going. I'm not sure that comics would have the respect or would be here without Image Comics. And so, with that in mind, I know I've talked about this stuff before, but recently I just got my first issue of the new Youngblood in the mail from Rob Liefeld. And I talk about Rob Liefeld too much, but he is trying to do his own thing yet again. Just like with the creation of Image Comics 30-some years ago, he is embarking on self-publishing. And so he just got the rights back to Youngblood a little bit ago and then immediately started churning out work. And he's selling them on his Whatnot and eBay live streams. And the books are expensive. The plan, I think, is for the Youngblood books to come out in comic shops later on. So if you're not buying them from the streams at an exorbitant price, you should be able to catch those stories. But it's interesting to me that I think Rob Liefeld has that spirit, just like at the beginning of Image, where they're trying something. Like he's taking really big swings with his work. Whether it was he had published a series called Last Blood, a couple of issues have come out, and he did manga versions. And that was one of my favorite things in comics. Like you could buy the standard comic colored version, or you could buy the manga edition, where they did the gray tones and the speed lines and changed some of the background slightly, and it's all the Zipatone stuff, and like it was really creative and original. That's my recommendation, is to check out some of the Liefeld stuff where he's trying new things, he's trying different distribution methods, he's trying to shake things up, because just like Image changed the industry 30 years ago, like it's interesting to think about where is it going to go, and folks like Rob Liefeld might be spearheading that direction. They might not. It all remains to be seen. Only the future will tell. But I do know the books that he's putting out as a Liefeld fan, like, they give you what you want. If you're the type of person that read Local Man because you loved Image in the 90s, like, you should be checking out some of this new Liefeld stuff.
They give you what you want, they give you what you need.
Oh, yeah, at a premium price. But still, it's what you need.
We hope that we give you what you need every single week when it comes to comic books here at the Last Comic Shop. We're not going to stop anytime soon, and you can definitely make sure that you're not going to miss any of our upcoming episodes by rate, reviewing, and subscribing over at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. We got some wonderful episodes coming up over the next month. We've got our annual Captain America 4th of July Spectacular, where we oftentimes pair that with a tournament where we rate some sort of food. What is it this year, J.A.?
Ice cream. And I still say one of these years we need to read a Captain Britain book just to be ornery.
Yes, so stick around for the last ice cream shop, as well as some Captain America coming up in upcoming weeks, as well as the Superman movie that's going to be dropping next month, as well as the Fantastic Four movie. J.A., we haven't gotten your thoughts on the female Silver Surfer finally out there. You know, the trailer was dropped. I thought she looked pretty good. What do you say?
Yeah, she looked good. It's good. I don't really mind that they gender flopped or gender switched or whatever you call it. I don't understand why they needed to do it, but whatever. It's all right. Okay.
It's a multiverse. They can have another one.
I know.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Sure.
But they did the comic book accurate Galactus. That's where I don't understand. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if are we ready for Reed Richards with a Ricky Ricardo mustache?
I think I am. I love Pedro Pascal and pretty much everything he's in. So I think he's going to actually bring a lot to that role. I think it's going to be exciting. I think I haven't been this excited about a comic book movie in a while. So looking forward to us reviewing the Fantastic Four.
The fact that it works is probably because it doesn't exist within the MCU. I mean, it's an MCU movie, but most of the movie is going to be taking place in an alternate Earth where there's no MCU characters. It's not superhero movies we're tired of. Maybe it's just MCU movies we're tired of.
Ooh. Yikes, shots fired. Chrome is sexy. And now there's Lady Chrome. Oh, man.
Yes. Chad, where can they find us on the socials, please?
So we are on social media. We are on the Blue Sky at lastcomicshoppodcast.com. We are on other places as well, like Threads, but really it's the Blue Sky is the place to go. And then you can always double back to our website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. where you could find links to all of our stuff as well as our merch store. Jay, what is in our merch store this week?
Always have t-shirts, coffee mugs, tote bags to carry around all those new books you're picking up at the shop, and hats. This week, we've got specials on a couple of different things. Pouches, because you always need pouches, whether that be on your vest or on your pants or various other locales of your costume. Can't go wrong with pouches and ski masks.
Yeah.
When you need to, you can't show your face and be doing something because it might violate some court order. So you throw on a ski mask.
Yes, but we do not promote crimes. Last Comic Shop. Don't tell them like Last Comic Shop told me to buy
That's
a
a
ski
feature,
mask.
not a bug, right? You can't say that Image Comics were a crime back in the day. It's a feature, not a bug.
Yikes. All right. And while we might be the Last Comic Shop podcast, we don't want to be the Last Comic Shop. So we encourage everybody to get out there and seek out copies of Local Man by Tim Seeley and Tony Fleecs. Seek out copies of 1963. You can find those in the buck bin sometimes, by Alan Moore and Steve Bissett and Rick Veitch, or I apologize, I don't know how to say that guy's name. Never have. Or you could go for the cyber route and find Cyber Force. The complete Cyber Force Volume 1 is out there. What you might not find in your local comic shop are the new Youngblood things. You got to go online for some of that new Rob Liefeld stuff that I recommended. But you never know what's going to pop up in your local spot. So check them out and make sure you're supporting those fine folks there. And come back and support our podcast, because once you buy all those comics, you're going to need a place to put them. So, Andy, how can folks kill two birds with one stone?
Well, you can go out to bcwsupplies.com and use our promo code LCSPOD. Save yourself 10% on all of those comic book stuffs that you're going to be buying anyways, like the bags and the boards and the boxes and the frame things that you can mount your comic books on the wall, and then they get all like sun bleached if you put them in our sunny room. I don't recommend that, but long story short, you can still buy them there, and it's real nice. Plus all your collectible card supplies, other collectibles, Funko Pop stuff, all kinds of great things. Take a look at BCW Supplies today. And once you're in, you've got your cart full, use that promo code LCSPOD and save yourself some cheddar. Jay, why don't you wrap the show for once?
All right. Keep reading comic books and keep listening to us.
Keep up with comic books like it's the 90s when people read comic books.
Yeah.
So many people read comic books. They sold so many.
Yeah, that's why their buck bins are full of Image comic books, because nobody wanted them.
I noticed that no one's doing a giant homage to Valiant comic books.
Yep.
You, Chad.
You, Crossjack.
Comic Shop Podcast was a 2025 Black Angus production.